examples given are kind of simple, just so that you guys can understand it a lot more easily versus me giving you like what is the standard of varsity and then you not understanding it. So yeah, let's start with case strategy. So the first slide here, and I want to take some time here, is just to kind of realize the differences when we talk about what exactly is the content of a case, and we compare that with what exactly is case strategy. The reason being is because I think a lot of times we get a bit confused. So when a judge tells you like, okay, perhaps you need to do this a little bit better, you're not quite sure what you're missing, because in your head you think that you have prepared for the case pretty well. So if we look on the left side, the usual contents of a case that you would get is, of course, you have definitions, you have all your problems, and you have your mechanisms, and then you have your yardstick or your value. So in other words, it's basically your metric, right? How do you determine whether one is likely or the other is not? And this is about metric. And then you have your stance or your burdens, and of course you have your arguments. So usually, so from point 1 to point 6 is what you often get when it comes to just having a case. The difference when you add in strategy into the picture is you focus on 3 important things, right? The first is just on clarity, which means it doesn't mean that you need to literally, like, no offense, change yourself and then make yourself sound super duper white. Like, that's not it. I think the value that we have with our identity and like our little accent really makes a big difference. I love that. So don't change that. The difference here in clarity is rather how do we try to make sure that we get straight to the point and we package it in a way that is easy to understand, so that the judges cannot just discredit you, neither can your opponent just discredit you. Right? And secondly is when it comes to mechanizing. So mechanizing, what I've realized, at least from the NEA circuit, is that you guys are very good at mechanizing it, which is basically proving why it's going to be likely. So you're always able to link it to your arguments. But what we're going to focus on today is not simply just, I guess, telling me what that mechanization is. I think proving why that mechanization is one that is likely and exclusive is something that really, really changes the margin, specifically if you're in, let's say, a tight debate where you're up against someone who probably has, their competency is quite similar to yours. So you really want to make that margin bigger. And thirdly, which I think everyone hopefully should know, is when it comes to framing. So framing is just this little strategy where you kind of add in a little bit of context, or you add in your metrics, or you basically add in the way that you perceive the debate, how it should be, and you add in that strategy. So for example, instead of me just giving you arguments why this is good, adding the strategy, which is why this must be as such, creates that difference, right? So this is why I think working on these 3 things is the most important. Even if you are a pro, you might be lacking these 3 things. Even if you are an M and you are trying to work on this, working on these 3 things as well really, really, helps, right? Okay, so I hope there is no question yet. Right? Okay, if you have any question, please just put it in the chat and I'll just see it if you are a bit shy. But if you're, let's say, brave and you want to just unmute, then do that as well. That's totally fine. The first thing is, let's just talk about the clarity of the case. I think this is so important, but truthfully, I don't think that we talk about this as much, right? So usually the judges would say, you didn't prove this, or the judges would say, there's a lot of fluff in your speech, right? Stuff like that. And I have gotten multiple of that, especially, no offense, if you're a woman like me, it's way harder because we just speak in a very, we're just a lot more passionate in speaking. That's the way I would frame it. But sometimes it may be seen as a bit too emotional or a bit too fast or just not as clear. So working on clarity is really important. So what I have on the slide here basically explains that you need to give an explicit definition. An explicit definition doesn't necessarily mean that that is the most important thing, but you need to make sure that it is clear and it doesn't leave room for confusion. But the problem here is specifically for like varsity, I've noticed, and the trend that is happening recently is that there's a lot of challenge in like definitions and what exactly should be the characterization. And the debate becomes messy because no team actually weighs down which one is the important characterization. So in this case, a mere definition isn't just you giving that clarity, right? It's basically you trying to provide reasons why, for example, this is as such, right? So if you look into the slide here, for example, definition is not necessary if the motion is as simple as this house would stop sending humans into space. But what I've noticed a lot of like prime ministers, what they do is they try to complicate it a little bit and prove why their definition is the likely one, when in actuality you don't quite need it at time, right? So the most important thing that I like the takeaway from this slide here is you need to ask yourself, is there any room for opposition to ask for a POI or a point of clarification? Because if there's any space, it means that you're not being as clear as what you should be doing. And one thing to note as well, this, not to say it's like a burden for the prime minister or the LO to have, but I do think that if we're a little bit more disciplined and making sure that your case at first is as clear as possible, it definitely creates like a dynamic for the whole team as well. So when you give a bad definition, of course, teams will squirrel. They will basically say like, oh, you're defending this, when in actuality you're not. And it's just a bit more harder for you then to prove, like later on when you're mechanizing, it's way harder for you to prove why your mechanization is likely, because the first up, the clarity from start, right? And you just, let's say, giving definitions without telling you why this is likely, that becomes the messy part of the debate then. Okay, so this one is, I think, very easy to understand. So what are the three elements of case clarity? So this is a very simple motion. This house would sacrifice civil liberties for national security. So in this, instead of you thinking about what exactly is civil liberty, of course, it's important to explain because sometimes some people don't know that. But what's important is for you to ask yourself, what are you actually willing to defend, right? Because you can have in different rooms in a tournament, and each government team is giving different interpretations of what civil liberties are. And to be honest, it's like, I wouldn't say one is better than the other. The difference here is to ask yourself, like, what are you actually trying to defend, right? So we always use these bombastic words, but in actuality, what we're just trying to mean are simple things like privacy and expression. So just go straight into that and explain why that is what you are defending versus, going deep into the technicalities of what civil liberties are, and then you get confused, and then your opponent gets confused, and then squirreling happens, right? Number two is in terms of contextualization, and this is very important. This doesn't always mean that it's a location context. So whenever we say contextualization, it does not necessarily mean that you have to go specifically like, oh, it's the Middle East, like, oh, these are like conservative states, let's say in the US. Like, no, that doesn't necessarily mean that is it. It can also be about laws, right? Because you're just, in a way, you're contextualizing what you are trying to defend when it comes to civil liberties. And number three is when you try to position on the parallels. So this is what you are trying to explain what you're okay and what you are not okay with, right? And that's why the first question, which is what are you actually willing to defend, is really important, because otherwise your case is just beating around the bush. You're just going around and around and around, but you're not really explaining what's the core of your case. So remember, ask yourself what you're willing to defend. Make sure there's a form of context to prove why this is what you're defending. And number three, make sure that it's clear what you're okay and what you are not okay with, right? So stick with these three things. I think you should have a clear-cut case, and it will definitely help when you are prepping as a team as well, right? Okay. And then the next question becomes, but Sarah, if I just go on and be like, oh, I'm okay with this, but I'm not okay with that, then what if my case is too soft? Or what if my case is too hard? And that means it's hard for me to then prove why I win, right? So Okay, I got you on that one. So, a very simple and like classic motion, we would just legalize abortion. So, a hard line is you saying like, oh, we will legalize abortion at all stages. And then the moderate line is probably you would legalize it during the first trimester. Then the soft line is you probably would legalize abortion only for medical necessity or victims of rape. So, that's like this motion gives you a clear spectrum of where you want to stand, right? So this is when you kind of have to also prey on your luck, right? Because it depends on, number one, for me personally, I think as a judge, it depends on what motion, what like the debate round ends up becoming, truthfully. But number two, it also depends on your opponents either calling it out or like it depends on you being able to execute it in the best way possible. Because I have like done a few rounds where I have like literally defended the hardest line ever, which till this day I'm like, how is that possible? And thank God I have won that round. So it definitely can be done. But there are also rounds where I was very convenient, not gonna lie, and I took a step that was easier for me. So it depends. But to make sure that you are kind of on the better end, um, make sure that it's less controversial, especially if you're doing a soft line case, because it's going to be way harder for you to defend this later on, right? And this is the nitty gritty of debating, right? Like it seems like, hard line, soft line, easy to understand, but you fall into the trap for sure. Because when you're like super passionate and you're like prepping with your teammate, and then you're like, boom, oh, this is the right case, and you realize, oh no, I messed up. So make sure that you think about, does it actually work or not, right? On a larger scale, does it work or not? I do think that you should try to at least aim to take a hard line, or at least a moderately hard line, when you're defining the context of the debate, because it does create a change. So it's far easier for the judge to explain why a team that took a harder stance, why they won, versus the team that took a easier stance, why they like won. So it's kind of easier to as a judge as well to kind of explain that. But it works vice versa as well, to be honest. It's just that to stay in the like line of caution, I think it's just a lot more simpler if we are able to just try our best to not be too convenient. Because when you're too convenient, then you are uncharitable to your opponent, and that doesn't give you a good quality debate. Okay. I'm just gonna skip these ones, to be honest. Yeah. Now, I just want to show you guys how it looks like. Okay. So when we talk about the clarity of the case, how will it basically look like? You will basically have your definitions. And these definition, guys, isn't like the high school definition where you're defining every little things. These are the definitions of you literally trying to define the important things and what you are willing to defend, really, right? Number two, context, of course. And thirdly, when it comes to either positioning, or let me show the previous slide. Oh my gosh, I just went, oh no. Okay, sorry guys. Yeah, or your positioning or your parallels. So what you are okay and what you are not okay with. So this, in a sense, is how it's supposed to be. So, you giving the context of what this debate really is about, and you explaining what you're okay or what you're not okay with. That's it. Okay, so this is the easiest part of our lecture for today in terms of clarity. So are there any questions? Amazing. Okay, let's talk about the second part. And this is really important. And by really, I mean a lot of the times, this is what determines the winner and the loser. So mechanizing your arguments. I love this part. I personally, I'm going to give you a little hint if you get me as a judge one day. If you are able to mechanize, you are able to weigh, and you just do all the strategy for me, you make it hard for me not to give you the win. Like literally. So I I think what's happening right now, the trend is that we like give so much material and so much method to our judge, and we hope that like the judge understands, and the judge is able to the brain, they're able to kind of like think about what's going to be the outcome. But I think that is super unhealthy to do. if you are able to just give a simple one and make the judge understand and make the judge's life easy, which is not meaning to say that they should be complacent, but rather if we do that form of weighing, if we do that mechanization, they can't say anything about it anymore, right? So even if you did lose, for example, when you're getting feedback, you having that mechanization means it's far easier for you to understand why the judge has a point of view versus you asking the judge like, but why did you not credit this? Why did you not credit that? Because think about it, right? If you're just like giving it in one shot, like everything in one go, it's hard for you yourself to understand why you lost versus directly going like, what did you think about the mechanization on this? What did you think about me weighing it this way, right? So logically, I think that's quite fair to understand. So let's look at this one. If we have an action debate, which is just basically a policy debate, you're referring to the mechanism for your model or your policy, right? So very simple in this motion of like cutting welfare support on compulsive gamblers. This one is funny. So of course you need to explain like how you're going to do that, right? That's a form of mechanization. You probably mandate an entry process. You probably set a monthly limit, right? These are little things that becomes really important. A step like for you to go a step further, I would advise for you to basically explain why this is likely, right? So you are doing the weighing as you are giving your mechanization. So for example, if we say we're going to mandate an entry process for any casino or gambling process, the likelihood of you doing this is just to explain why there's an incentive to do this. Because if you create this mandate, right, in order to basically help these welfare recipients, there is an incentive to help them back. So mandating the entry process for them to get into any casinos or gamblings places is important. So here basically I'm proving is that you are already edging it out to prove why this is what you're doing before anyone can ask anything, right? So you're going a step ahead. But this isn't necessary for a value or a factual debate. So if it's about, let's say, a value debate of whether is it more harm than good, you can just say it has worsened foreign and global sentiments against the US, for example, right? So there's not much mechanizing there. What you can do, however, is just give an explanation on how and what it would be, even if you are not required to defend the feasibility of the policy. So I don't know if you guys have ever been to a lecture where, you know, the lectures before a tournament starts and then the cap does like a lecture, like there's a little lecture about, value judgment debate, this debate, that debate. And then if you've noticed, right, they will say something along the lines of a value judgment debate doesn't necessarily require a model. Yes, that's true. But it's not wrong for you to just explain why it's going to be likely. So you giving those little details, it does help, right? So it doesn't mean like, okay, no, it's not a policy motion. I don't have to care about modeling. No, still think about how that's going to play out because that will become your mechanization. Yeah. So two elements when you are mechanizing. The first one is, of course, effectiveness, right? So this from a mechanism, it directly deals with the problem statement. So you don't have to care about what motion is above here, okay? Just think about it. When you're mechanizing, the end goal is for you to prove why this is important, and secondly, why there's solvency. And these two things will always have to do with effectiveness. And truthfully, as debaters, the first thing you think about when you're prepping as well is effectiveness. So remember, this should be like your holy grail in terms of like, okay, mechanizing, what do I do? Effectiveness for sure, right? So prove that and prove why your mechanism is effective. Secondly, is when it comes to safeguards or caveats. So this is when you prep for the obvious opposition harms and you mitigate it. And there's a way for you to mechanize this as well, right? So, for example, if you are able to tell me like your even ifs, or if you're able to do your weighing, that for me as well, I credit it as you mechanizing your argument, because not only are you mitigating the harms that opposition will likely say, but at the same time, it also makes sure that like you are cushioning your case. If you are government, you are cushioning your case on team government as well before they can even ask, right? So yeah, no. Yeah, similarly, I don't think we have enough time to discuss each and every like active exercise, but basically when you mechanize your argument, make sure that you are number one, proving effectiveness, doing that weighing, and secondly, of course, having that safeguard, which is you basically mitigating and weighing what's likely going to happen. Some people call it a preemption, which is also true, but I personally think that if you have the time, by all means do that form of preemption, but make it in a way that you are make it in a way as such that you are doing your even ifs, right? That you are mitigating versus like, oh, I have a preemption. Because if you see that, what if your opponent is not going to give that case? This is assuming you are PM. But if you go even if, and you are weighing why your even if is the most charitable and the most exclusive, it means that like regardless of whether your opponent is going to have the case that you are preempting or not, they have to engage with it because you have pushed that from a burden on them. Okay, this is my favorite part as a debater, framing. So a little side note for you guys, when it comes to framing, I have always been like, so I started off as a debater, as a whip speaker, and then I became a deputy. But this is cringy, but me at my prime, uh, so me with the achievements that you guys saw, which is cringy to say, I was actually the first speaker. And I was always like, oh, first speaker, it's like just so boring because like, what do I do? I just have to say something scripted. Yeah, kind of true. But I feel that if you're able to strategize and frame from first, and this is one of the reasons why I've gotten a few compliments when I give my first speeches, is because I make it a habit to like pack my arguments in a way that everything is framed. Everything has my even if, and everything has, I have framed out the stuffs that should not exist in the debate, or even if it exists, should not matter as much in the debate. Oh, just give me 1 second, guys. Okay, now if we see what's on the slide here, framing is basically an exercise when you're showing what's the most important thing in the debate. My coach, what she would say is that framing is the anchor of your case, which means, if you've noticed, some people give the most sophisticated case. They give like three, like five levels of analysis, and then they give this and that. And you then realize that there are teams, and I think this one is more common, at least in Southeast Asia. You'll realize there are other teams that just goes, here's the framing, and here's why we win. And they win. And they win over the teams that go five levels of analysis. Okay? Reason is because they just prove why their case is the most important thing in the debate. The arguments that they are saying are the most important in the debate. So, for example, you can use a compelling narrative on the vulnerability of a particular actor and then position yourself, right? So, show me what the narrative looks like. For example, okay, of course, if the debate is about narrative, if it's not, you don't have to randomly put in narrative, okay? Just a side note. So yeah, make sure that you have a narrative and then you are positioning yourself as the team that perhaps saves actor X. So the team that protects actor X is the best team that wins the debate. So it's that little debate lingo where like, if we're able to prove this, then we win, like stuff like that. Actually, it does create a quite of like a difference, because imagine this, if you're a judge and you hear a team say that, you're like, I'm going to see if you can prove that, right? But at the same time, because you've said that, you as a debater in the round, you're going to want to prove that. And then the judge will be like, oh, this is what the team wants to prove to me. So the judge is just going to be like ticking the boxes for the things that is able to prove what you are trying to do, right? So let's say you say, I'm going to prove why, let's say there's going to be mobilization for this, for the feminist movement, right? The judge, like anything you say unconsciously in their head, they're going to be like, yeah, okay, okay, because you've already said that you're going to prove that, right? And it also pushes the burden of your opponent to be like, oh no, we have to prove why they cannot do that. And then, that's how you get a good quality debate. So framing is also an exercise in excluding things that you believe should not matter in the debate. This is called framing up or like reframing. This is usually done, and I usually encourage this, especially for the deputy speakers, because that's when the debate starts to it starts to develop, and then the quality of the debate usually it becomes better in the middle of the debate, which is where the deputies are at. And so the deputies then needs to like frame out everything that's not needed, everything that was pushed by, let's say, your opponent, everything that perhaps matters but doesn't matter as much. You clarifying that is really important. So, for example, if the motion is we would allow registered organ donors to receive organ donations, this debate is not about those who cannot donate organs because of religious reasons, because they wouldn't be giving out their organs to begin with. So that's you framing out stuffs that do not matter in the debate and making sure that you're pushing on things only on the things that matters. So setting a value or a metric for the debate is a type of framing, right? So you having that metric is a strategy, and you are attempting, and this is what I was explaining just now, to shape the judge's priority in the debate. What should the judge prioritize first? What should the judge keep in mind, right? What should the judge credit in order for them to find the winner of the round? So these are the things that you need to do. And that's why that the little time when you're just a bit more passionate and you're like, I'm going to prove this and I'm going to win, even though it's slightly cringy, perhaps there's a better way for you to sentence that. But saying that really creates a difference for me, I personally believe. So saying something is not your burden of proof is also a type of framing. Because if you think about it, that is also you trying to frame out the stuff that do not matter, at least the stuff that do not matter on your end, what you do not have to do. So that's why it's actually still quite important. Okay. Again, guys, if you have any forms of question, just ask in the chat, okay? So framing can be positive or it can be negative, right? It doesn't just always have to be like you taking something very conveniently and you being like, we can't be having the burden of proof to say why this is good, right? No, it doesn't have to be like that. It can also be something that is positive, where you're like, even if we can prove this, this is not within our burden because of ABC reasons, right? So that can still be done. So as long as it serves the purpose of shaping the perspective of the judge, right? Because think you have to also remember, teams, always, always, always remember, you can be the best debaters, you can be super duper smart and you know everything in the world, but if the stuffs that you say does not meet the wavelength of the judges, you're still not going to win, right? So always, always remember, what can I do to help this judge? What can I do to make sure this judge gives me the win? You just have to make it hard for this judge to not give you the win. Sorry, to not give you the loss. So doing it like helps in terms of like, shaping how the judge should be judging. Yeah, so that's why framing is important. So let's look at framing things out. So let's say about legalizing incest. So either way, incest will continue to exist. Difference here is that we allow them to talk about it openly, seek support systems, and potentially save those who are trapped. So see, this is quite charitable because you are already, in a way, talking about the reality, right? But at the same time, you are also telling the judge what exactly distinguishes you from your opponent, or why is it like an important thing for you to legalize it, right? Without you going into your argument. So think about this. This doesn't have to be in your argument. This is really just framing. This is just strategy, right? But having this from strategy and then cushioning it with your case, like your normal case setup, that's how you kind of create that difference. Okay, so of course, legalizing abortion, banning abortion does what it does is it increases more deaths of mothers, and then they do like back alley abortions to force themselves into a miscarriage, and then it increases more baby dumpings, so it sends more children into foster care and unloving homes, and it puts more children on the responsibility of parents who never actually wanted them. So this, to some, becomes their argument. And that's why it's a bit sad, because your argument should be something that is more dynamic, but your framing should be something that is clear cut, that is something that your judge has to credit because it's the reality, or let's say because it is the most important thing, right? Because it happens, stuff like that. Okay, right. I did think yep. Oh, okay, I got a question. How does framing differ from contextualizing? Okay, so that's a very good question. So the way I would say it, right? I hope I can call you Esther, and I hope I'm not butchering your name. So Esther, contextualizing here, is something that has to do with a, let's say, either it's a specific place, or it is you trying to contextualize slash characterize something. So like the previous slide just now, we were talking about what was the one we were doing about just now? One second. Is it this one? Yep. Just now we were talking about civil liberties, right? The context here can also be about it exists in other forms of laws. So in other words, the contextualizing there could be the location, but could also be that you are just telling me why this is as such. But framing here, and in the context of what we were discussing, framing out, this is something that does not have to do with context. So irregardless of what happens in, let's say, A or B area, or even if it happens in this law or that law, framing exists in a way where it's just the most important thing. Like it just happens to be such way. So for example, if the motion is this house legalize incest, you trying to contextualize is you telling me where this happens, right? But okay, I feel like this is a bit awkward to do the first. Okay, the second one. This sounds to legalize abortion, let's say, right? You contextualizing could be you trying to find out where exactly does this form of abortion usually happen, right? So areas that have legalized abortion, where is it? Legalizing abortion means it requires a law, right? But when we talk specifically about framing, right, it's about the stuff that you see on the slide right now. So all it does is that it increases deaths, baby dumpings, more children into foster care and unloving homes. These are just things that happens irregardless of context. So that's one of the easiest way for you to compare contextualizing and framing. Though I do think that they can come hand in hand as well. Because if you think about it, if you are trying to prove a metric, like why A is better than B, and then you give a context, that still works because framing is also about metric, right? Framing is also, let me go to the previous slide. Oh, did I just, one second. Oh, 1 second, sorry. Okay, because, oh my gosh. Sorry, I hate Google Slides, to be honest. Yeah, because it's not only just the most important thing, it can be the value or the metric of the debate, right? There's a lot of things, but I would really recommend just remember what is the most important thing in this debate? What is the strategy? What is something that like opposition needs to to realize if before they can claim their benefits whatsoever. Okay, now, so okay, thank you. So there is no exhaustive list on how to frame a debate, actually. You are simply just looking at the bigger picture and you're just asking yourself, what will win me the debate? And then when you have found the answer, frame the debate around that issue, right? Which obvious harms from the other team will distract from the main issues? If you have found the answer, then think about what's the reasonable way to frame it out of the debate. And this is about framing out stuff. So use analysis and examples for you to basically build a narrative of importance. Basically just means you're proving why your case is the most important at the very beginning of the first prop speech. This is when you hear about tipping point. Oh, this is my favorite word to use as PM. Like, what's the tipping point, right? Which is basically just the urgency of the case or the priority or moral parallel framing, right? Or drastic problems call for drastic measures. This one I don't quite like, but the first two, yes, is something that a lot of debaters often use. Okay. Okay, so we're at our last two slides. The first one is, let's talk about the full case building for government. If the motion is this House would allow corporal punishment in schools, see, I tried to make it as simple as possible. Of course, you need to be able to define what exactly is this corporal punishment. What are you actually willing to defend? Are you willing to defend like your teachers being a little bit physical but not too physical, stuff like that? So tell me what you're willing to defend, giving me the context. So what is this debate actually really about, like in this current age? And even if this motion sounds a bit like meh, but like, what is actually this debate about? Like, think about that, right? And then be able to build that context around it. And then you should be able to position yourselves and give basically all your, like, what you're okay with, what you're okay in defending, what you are not okay with defending. And then the problem is, what exactly is the status quo and what are you trying to solve? Because you have identified the problem, therefore you have the solution. And of course, your mechanism is your model. So remember the stuff that we talked about in terms of doing that weighing, in terms of proving that likelihood, right? And then lastly is your framing, which is what is the most important thing in the debate. And that you telling the judge how you are planning to win this debate. So let me annotate. These two things, they are the most important, specifically when it comes to case strategy. Definition here, and positioning and context. This is clarity. Clarity takes time because unfortunately, like let's say if you go to like international tournaments, let's say if you go to worlds, even if you go straight to the point, some judges will still say you are not clear. So this one is more so of like a practice. You will get better sooner or later. But mechanisms and framing, these are the two things that should be highlighted, that you guys should aim to do very well. Okay? Okay. Let's look at the next one. Okay, now the opposition case setup is, just because you don't have a policy to propose, it doesn't mean you have no case setup. So every opposition team, you will still be forced to defend some form of counterfactual. So you still have to make it clear what you're willing to defend, what you're not willing to defend. It's the same thing. Don't just give me like a negative case, right? Don't just give me like, oh, here's why government is bad. This is why everything government says is harmful. That's good. That could be a part of your argument, but you also need to build your case to explain basically why the stuff that you are defending are still things that are good, versus just giving a negative one or just mitigating the harms. So the three elements of an opposition counter setup is, you of course provide clash. I'm pretty sure everyone knows this. This is basically your main opposition to the government policy. Like, this is you, if you're in opposition, trying to get to the nice edge in the middle, right? And then you have your counterfactual. Counterfactual here is you explaining, do you actually support the status quo that government is saying? Are there any like better ways to support, basically that you are able to provide to improve the status quo that is exclusive and different than what government says, right? And then of course you have your framing. So what's important is debate. What are things you are not required to prove? So similarly, you are trying to frame out stuff. Okay. Yeah, so similarly, like I said, clash, your counter setup. Counter setup, guys, same thing we discussed just now for government, okay? It's just a fancier word, they added counter at the start, but it's like the same thing. And then clash is just you positioning yourself, like what you're okay, what you are not okay with. And then framing, same thing we discussed just now, guys. Okay, that applies with government, still the same thing for opposition. Okay, so if let's say this is my last slide, let's say you are doing BP, right? This is just a let's say, because I'm a bit, so a lot of stuff we discuss applies for AP and BP, but specifically for this one, when we try to think about opening teams, think about it, they have the least amount of time. They have like 15 minutes and it starts right away. So the strategy here is always, by the way, it also applies to AP. Okay, so spend prep time thinking about what your team wants and how you will achieve it, as well as what are the main strokes of arguments from the other side and how is it going to interact with each other. That's why the whole questioning about will they ask me a point of clarification helps, because you are already thinking of, oh, my case is not too clear, the clarity is not there yet, right? But you should also beat the other opening team by winning arguments and rebutting it well. You should beat your own closing team by covering the important bases, not leaving any questions unanswered. This is very, very important. AP or BP, weighing is super duper important. Like, even if it sounds like it should be prioritized a lot more in BP for sure, but even in AP, if you can give me these little wings, I will be so grateful and I would definitely love your team. And beat the other closing team by taking a POI from them. You know, these ones are, of course, very, very generic ones. So remember, guys, we're reaching the end. I will be answering some questions if we have any. But to summarize this lecture, at least, making sure that you are able to not only give a form of clarity in your case, number two, be able to mechanize your case, whether that be as a team when you are prepping or whether that be your own personal speech and you suddenly having that light bulb moment and mechanizing it super duperly effortlessly and stuff like that, or framing, right, where you are really working on what is the most important thing in this debate, what does your team win and what's exclusive from your team. These are the three things that really sets apart the margin in a debate. Whether you're a pro, whether you're an M, the three things that we have covered, truthfully, it really creates a difference in any form of circuit you are at or in any tournament that you're at, basically. Yeah. Okay, that's about it. Do you guys have any questions?
Hello, can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for the lecture today, and the slides were super helpful. I'm an undergrad at George Mason University Korea campus, and I have recently taken on the role of the president of the new debate society at our school. But me, including myself and other members, are novice debaters. We do have experience in public speaking, but in terms of debate, we are just beginners.
Mm-hmm.
So, would there be any like training manuals or something that we could follow as a guideline to kind of set up our society?
To set up your society? Ooh.
Yeah, to kind of to proceed with, just regular training sessions, meetings. Is there like a general guideline that coaches recommend?
Oh, that's a very good question. And I think it's quite beneficial. So the first thing I would do is to recommend you guys to keep in touch with KIDA as well. I think like you guys should probably you can ask Yuhyuk and stuff like that, but I think
Yeah,
you
yeah,
should
for sure.
guideline for sure.
Yeah.
But if I can give you an advice that is just that's just very casual. Okay, that means like it's not formal at all. So I don't really have the guidelines that you're looking for. I don't necessarily think that like there's a big debate constitution that applies to everyone. But what I would say is, in terms of like gearing your society up, the first thing is coming up with the schedule of how you're going to do your trainings. And that form of training needs to be productive. It means that you can't just put in everyone and lump them all together in one meeting. I'm once again, I'm not sure how it's done in KIDA's perspective, but at least on my end, how it's done is it's usually divided into, let's say, beginners, intermediate, and then seniors. This is the way that you are able to like make sure that the trainings are productive, because you don't want someone who is really I guess um, really good at debating to debate with someone who is starting off. Neither do you want someone who is starting off to feel discouraged when they're with someone who's better in the room. That's the first thing. But there are instances where like the club is just very small and you just have like a couple of people and you have to see their faces. What I would do is having, let's say, once a week or twice, like kind of training, and then like work on like slides, basically on like lesson plans. So you have a trainer that basically explains the skills that applies for everyone, regardless of your your efficiency in debating. That's the first. The second is like, Minju, do you have like your board of, sorry, what's it called? Board of directors, like all your members, the committee and stuff like that?
Oh, yes, we just set up an executive committee, executive board, I guess.
Yeah.
But we're very new, so I just got in contact with the president of KIDA a couple of weeks ago. And once
Okay.
the semester starts, I think I can talk with our executive members and talk with, hopefully, have some chances to communicate with KIDA's secretariat team to get some, helpful tips to how to get our society
Yes,
get started.
yes, that's
But yeah, I just wanted to get some general advice from you because you're the experienced debater and a coach. So,
so, yeah, yeah. So the thing is, right? I do have to say something though. I think right now, because everything is online, we really have to make use of this. I remember my time when I had to debate physically. It was fun. It was, everything. But I think you should also think about making a bit more of hybrid, right? So having, let's say, if you want to call in for trainers that, let's say, do not reside in Seoul or something like that, right? And doing your sessions online also helps, and it helps for the members as well. And it also helps when you are trying to get more people to join, because they see it as like a lot more, like the barrier of entry just becomes a lot more easier for them to join. So I would also recommend you to think about that as well. But yeah, I think it's a trial and error, truthfully, Minju, and I wish you the best of luck. I hope like everything will be okay for you. Yeah,
yeah, thank you.
no worries. Thank you for asking. If you have any questions, guys, I'm more than happy to answer. Give you guys like a minute. Guys, I have a question. Is it really cool there right now? Because I'm going next week.
I mean, it's snowing a lot right now.
Do you think it's going to snow next week?
I'm not really sure. Are you coming because of Pro-Am?
Uh, no, I'm going for YTN.
Ah, okay, okay.
Yeah,
I
but I'm
think
like,
it'll be pretty cold next week as well. I'm not sure about snowing.
mm, I've been preparing for it. Like I've gotten a lot of heat techs or like thermals because I just cannot stand the cold. So yeah, I'm so excited to be back. I love Korea. Okay, any other questions, guys? I will take that as a good feedback, No question means good. Okay. I'll send it back to you. I think I should be done. I'll just stop sharing first.